What's up, everybody? We are back with a live edition of the Ad Podcast here at beautiful CES at the Creator Space in sunny Las Vegas. A little windy Las Vegas today. And we have Chris Peterson, the founder of DWNLOAD Media and also a senior advisor for Podspace. Chris, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man.
So, how's CES been for you so far?
It's hectic, but I love it. You spend more time in taxi cabs just going back and forth, but it's awesome.
So what would you say was your primary goal in coming out here this year?
Advocating for podcasts, man. Like,
That's
podcasts
awesome.
are
You're speaking my language, obviously.
completely undervalued, and 2025, mark my words, will be the year of the podcast.
Let's go. Yeah, it's sad that this entire CES, I don't think I've gone to a single panel that wasn't about AI. Not one panel.
I just got off a panel that was focused on the creator economy. The creator space here at CES is a huge step forward, and I'm super grateful that they added podcasts. They specifically reached out to me to say, hey, we want someone to talk about podcasting, and was on with an executive from Whaler, an executive from TikTok, and the fact that they're adding that into it, I think the podcast is awesome and shows how big of an impact, especially in the last 3 to 5 months, podcasting has had, just culturally.
Culturally, I mean, basically changed the direction of the country overnight.
Yes,
yeah.
And let's just keep the win for the podcast space and not talk about the rest. But it's a massive one win, I think, for just the overall creator economy and understanding how impactful creators are right now and will be in the future compared to legacy media.
Yeah,
but then
I think
also,
legacy media is kind of that was the final death nail. Like when Rogan and maybe Call Her Daddy, I don't know what the impact was. That was kind of interesting. There's a lot of controversy over the pay-to-play stuff, but
look at that one in particular. In the same week, Kamala went on Call Her Daddy first, and then a few days later went on Howard Stern. Both are Sirius XM products.
The Stern one obviously made sense, and I think, Howard has been kind of shackled by his legacy deal with Sirius. I feel like the same way Rogan was kind of limited to just Spotify. I didn't watch Rogan a lot during the Spotify era when it was only Spotify. I'd only go and seek it out because if there was a guest that I was like, oh, I got to see this one, I would pop up my Spotify and watch it. But I'm a YouTube podcast consumer. I watch my podcast at night in front of my TV on the YouTube app. And I think that a lot of podcast producers and distributors are now saying, hey, we got to be all places everywhere. We got to let the consumer choose where and when they consume.
1,000%. So 2 points real quick. Rewind with the Call Her Daddy interview. From a media perspective, if you go back and look, and I posted this on my LinkedIn of Google Trends of search results of Call Her Daddy, Howard Stern, and every other interview Kamala had done, and Call Her Daddy just outpaced everything.
That makes sense.
And it was just not even close, right?
Yeah.
And so that tells you where the interest was from a consumption. I think the Kamala campaign should have picked up on that and done more podcasts.
Totally.
But to your other point, hold on. You just sit and watch podcasts on your TV?
Oh yeah, I only watch podcasts on my TV.
Wow.
Well, as far as YouTube is considered. So my consumption is generally I'll listen or watch some stuff in the morning in my work mode if I'm researching a guest.
Yeah.
So if you and I had met in the real world, not at CES at the last second, I would have listened to every podcast you've ever been on and watch every video that I could find in the first few pages of Google.
Yeah.
So that's where I do kind of my lean in podcast watching and listening from a professional perspective, I would say. But if I'm listening and watching shows as a consumer, it's on my couch flipping through 3 or 4 top news channels that I want to watch in the evenings on weekdays. I'll generally kind of be more newsy, and then on the weekends it's more personal development, shows that are trying to teach me something, I suppose, or tell me about drug cartels in Colombia or something like that, more of an educational deep dive type thing.
So I was just having this conversation with someone else earlier today where I maintain today, and I have for a while, that YouTube is so underrepresented in overall podcast consumption. So literally 3 years ago, everyone would have said Apple has 65-70% market share. that considerably changed because Spotify came into the market very aggressively. But just within the last like year or two, people have gone, oh yeah, lots happening on YouTube, right?
Yeah.
And now I think most people would say, yes, YouTube is where the predominant
dominant consumption channel now,
and
right?
it's so simple because YouTube is the only platform of a podcast platform that's actually trying to find a podcast creator a new audience.
Discovery. Yeah,
you can post your podcast on every single platform, and maybe if you have a relationship with Apple or Spotify or whoever, they'll promote your podcast for like a week or two, right?
Yeah, right.
And that works. That's great. But like after that, what happens?
Yeah.
YouTube, especially if you're cutting up clips
into
shorts, and you can play the algorithm, it's constantly trying to bring you audience. And if you know how to game that system, it can, look, those people may only watch your short and never actually go to a long form, but I would say who really cares?
Totally. Yeah.
It's just about reaching audience.
I mean,
right?
I've heard shows that have 5,000 subscribers get 50 million views on their clips.
That's insane.
It's wild, like what you can do if you properly do a bunch of banger cut-ups and then of your guest, and then also if you're smart, you're not just promoting that on your channel, you're sending them to your guests, letting them collab post with you or whatever, and then you're actually getting the value of their reach.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I haven't been able to find here at CES, maybe you know where it is, where's the podcast hardware section?
That's a good question. Honestly,
that's a miss, right?
It is a miss, and I'll be honest. Like, when I started asking other like podcast colleagues, like most are not coming to CES. It seems. The convention schedule like gets very busy in the spring, so maybe that has part of it. Yeah. Part of the reason, but like, it's something that I think the podcast industry, as we mature, we need to be here and represented.
Totally.
And like, look, not trying to toot my own horn, but like getting on that panel with TikTok and the creator economy to be like, no, we're here. Like, and this is a big deal. Especially, again, like capitalizing off of the momentum that we've had in the fall of 2024. And realizing that audio right now, AM/FM radio is a $14 billion ad revenue business. The audience has already started to move to digital for spoken word and music.
Wow.
But the revenue is not following
it's not going fast enough.
Not fast enough.
Yeah.
But if you look at all the audiences and break them down, the only audience that is still bigger on AM/FM than digital consumption is boomers.
Yeah, right.
But yet, why is the revenue still at AM/FM?
Crazy.
It needs to be moving to digital. So I think we're going to have an influx of revenue coming in sooner. And it doesn't mean we don't need, like, podcasting's not going to obviously get every single dollar of that.
Right.
It doesn't need to be.
No, of course
it's not even a $2 billion industry yet.
Podcast is a hybrid, right? Because there's programmatic, which is basically the videos, ads that YouTube and all the different companies serve by insertion. But then there's host-read, which is the real bread and butter, at least for the creator's perspective. Like, and those are the ads that I actually don't fast forward through or hit the skip button on, because I'm like, all right, this is kind of content. If he relates it to his life and how he actually uses it and tells me something interesting about, like, this is a product that not only supports them, but he likes it and here's why, I'll actually watch that.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of again, like, this goes into the beauty of, like, and it's not podcast specific, but like, a YouTube host, whoever, if you have that connection with them to where you're leaning in to consume their content, you have a trust, you have already that relationship, and if they're telling you, hey, this is something that's great, I want to try that, I'm more inclined to use that too. And so you can bake that into the actual episode on YouTube or a podcast. You can read it, and then it's distributed via a marketplace and dynamically inserted across, and so it can constantly be updated. So it's, to the listener, it sounds just like a baked-in host thread, or it can just be a totally programmatic thing, which sounds more like a radio ad or a TV ad. But like a healthy mix across the board, I think, is the right solution to that for most like shows with scale. But the good news is that, again, like, all of this revenue is
still tied up.
It's still largely untapped and unrealized in the podcast space specifically, because it's going to double in the next 5 years of ad revenue just in the US, and then globally all of the other markets are right behind the U.S. in growth.
Yeah, it's crazy. Going back to CES, I was thinking, some of the hardware guys or CES itself needs to just set up a bunch of podcast booths. All the equipment's here. All the vendors are here. Imagine, we're on this show right now, we're talking about the fact that we're in CES. CES is literally the backdrop of the show.
Yeah.
That's all of an entire free ad for them. And then podcasters would probably want to come out here, because that's been another big tricky part for me this week is where am I going to shoot if I have a remote show? Am I going to duck into a hallway, or how am I going to even pull this off? This creator space has been a blessing, because it's they've got these private rooms we can book. They've got those little stands over there, and that kind of makes it interesting. People are walking around in the background, but there's so much value that these brands, if they have hardware equipment that they want to market to not just the podcast community, but larger consumers, because there are so many DIY people now that are trying their hand at it. Feels like there's a real opportunity at shows like CES and NAB to probably get more active and to court people and bring them in.
1,000. I mean, that's a great point, and I think we should collectively email our contact, sure, whoever tomorrow, and be next year this is what we want to do. But to that point, this all started because we have mutual LinkedIn connections, right?
Right.
Who I trust, and so I have that trust with them. And I saw they engaged with one of your posts saying I'm going to CES, who wants to meet up? And I was on my flight out here, and I'm like, yes, let's meet up. Let's go.
I love it.
And you were able to book this room right after the panel, and we banged this thing out.
We made it work.
And, it should be more of that, right?
Yeah.
It should almost be the creator space probably should be after every single panel, hey, you've got to do 10 minutes, and we're bringing these podcasters in for your specific vertical, and it's all sponsored by Shure or whoever. This is easy.
So much opportunity.
Let's do it.
All right, so we're 12 minutes in. What are your top, most exciting things that you're pumped about for the industry going into 2025? What are you looking to accomplish, and what are you excited about?
Yeah, so I'm super excited because in the U.S. with the podcast market specifically, 2023, we got a lot of bruises, I think, with PR. And
kind of a lot of shows that got funded that didn't pan out. Economics that didn't work out on the VC side.
Absolutely, and all of that's true, but there was also headlines that didn't really tell the full story of what was really going on. And what really was going on is we had a marketplace that was kind of growth at all costs. And so you had these major platforms, Spotify, most notably probably, that is trying to build the plane while it's in the air, because they have had a really bad business model at the time of paying music license fees that was never going to be profitable for them. And they needed to figure out podcasting, audiobooks, whatever, to help make a better business. They've started to do that, and now they're becoming a profitable company. To the smaller scale, which I'm more excited about, is you had these podcast companies that money was really easy to get a few years ago, and the market was very frothy from investment standpoint. They were just trying to grow as big as possible, and necessarily their P&L maybe didn't look awesome at the end of the day. 2023 and 2024 were the righting of the ship, essentially.
The bootstrappers pulled out and built stuff on shoestring budgets, and they built massive value for themselves.
1,000%. And the companies are now healthy and primed for very, very healthy and realistic growth. And so with that, and all of the tailwinds that we've seen, from the podcast election and all of that, right? We're going to see a lot of smart investment come into the space, which is going to give these founders that are doing it the right way and have a solid business plan the opportunity to really grow and create something special. So I'm really excited to see what happens in 2025, 2026 with that opportunity. I think we're going to see more consolidation, smart consolidation, not necessarily Spotify or iHeart buying things, but players with scale already folding in other opportunities, putting them together, unifying essentially to create opportunities, and also doing that internationally. And I think ultimately that just creates a healthier business to have a little bit of a leveling of the playing field between the very large scale players and these, the ones, there's a huge delta between Spotify's of the world and the largest podcast networks. It's not going to close, but it'll be evened out a little bit.
Some leveling.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, hey, if people see this, where can they find you? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn, Chris Peterson, Download Media. There's no O, DWNLOAD, Download Media. You'll find me. Easiest way, and let's connect there and tell me where I'm right and where I'm wrong.
Let's go. Chris Peterson, live from CES. Thank you very much.
Thanks, buddy.